Welcome to Question Time, which tonight comes from Carlisle. And sitting around the table with me tonight, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson, the Labour MP, Nandy, the UKIP leader, Paul Nuttall, the General Secretary of Britain's biggest union, Unite, McCluskey, and from the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kate Andrews. Thanks very much, thank you. As always, watching from home, you can make comments about what you hear on our Facebook site, on Twitter, or text 83981. Press the red button to see what others are saying. I always thought this red button was on the television set. It's on the zapper. I expect you know that, but I've never tried to do that, so I didn't know that. We'll take our first question anyway. Technology. No. This is a question from somebody we haven't seen for a bit. Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown.
Will the Brexit divorce turn messy?
Will the Brexit divorce turn messy? Len McCluskey?
Well, hopefully not, especially if the Prime Minister listens to people. I mean, I think, first of all, we need to make certain that we don't get into a project fear about Brexit. That was the mistake that the Remain campaign made last time. Brexit is with us. We are leaving the European Union. But the important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is to make certain that it's a Brexit that works for ordinary people. It's a Brexit that defends jobs, investments, defends our communities, and most importantly, of course, defends workers' rights. And that's something that at the moment, the government's approach, the Prime Minister's approach, being a so-called hard Brexit, appears to be not listening to employers, not listening to trade unions. I hope that changes. I understand the Prime Minister would not want to show her hand. I'm a negotiator. You need to keep things close to your chest, but there needs to be parliamentary scrutiny at different stages. And it's vitally important that the voice of working people is listened to. Wherever I go in manufacturing at the moment, companies are saying that they are concerned about the future, the uncertainty, the lack of investment that might come. I'll give you a very quick example, David. I met with the president of Ford Europe just before Christmas. He tells me that Ford's have just made a decision to invest $4.5 billion into electrification. I asked him, were we going to get a chunk of that? And he said, at the moment, the word from Detroit is, no, we can't invest in Britain because we are concerned about what Brexit means. And that is the issue wherever I go. I met 200 of my senior shop stewards and conveners last Saturday from the automotive sector, a jewel in the manufacturing crown at the moment. And already we've got BMW talking about the new electric Mini being built in Holland. We've even got Nissan, the company that we thought, and we were delighted that they'd reached an agreement with the government, now saying that depending on what Brexit is, they will review their position.
So you don't sound very optimistic, but we'll come back to some of these points. But Ruth Davidson, a divorce turning messy?
Well, I don't think it has to. I mean, what's been really strange about the Brexit debate... Well, I think that you saw from the tone of the Prime Minister yesterday, it was a very conciliatory tone. You saw from Donald Tusk when he accepted the letter, he said that his overwhelming feeling was sadness. And I think we have to recognise that this isn't a zero-sum game. This isn't that if somebody wins, somebody else loses. And in fact, if it turns into a point-scoring fight, then actually we all lose. And I think what's really interesting in this is it has united people across a whole different spectrum. So I'm the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. I stood on a platform last year with Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. I'm sitting next to Len McCluskey here today. Three very different sets of politics across the spectrum. But three things we all have in common. We were all Remainers. We all recognise that Brexit is happening and the UK will leave the European Union. And we all believe that there is a positive outcome that can happen if we go about these negotiations in the right way. That has nothing to do with our politics, but that's about how you approach the deal. Now, it will be difficult, it will be complex, but I think that we have to support and input to the Prime Minister to make sure that she's got the best negotiating hand, and no matter where you are, we can help with that. But it also means, and Len's quite right, it means that we should be making sure that we're looking at this deal as it goes along.
But Len was saying he knows how to negotiate. Of course he does. He's a trade union negotiator. Was the Prime Minister right to raise security? We've had a number of questions on that as one of the things that might be withdrawn if they didn't get if the government didn't get what it wanted.
Well, I think that that's a misrepresentation of what was said. What the Prime Minister
in security terms, a failure to reach agreement would mean our cooperation in the fight against crime and terrorism would be weakened.
Absolutely.
What else does it mean?
What it means is we need to make sure that we get an agreement. And this is something that the Prime Minister put out in our Lancaster House speech way back in January. She put the 12 points that were so important for us. Now, we know that we are, and this is again where it comes back to this zero-sum game, we know that we're all safer if we do get a deal and we work together. We know that we all lose out if we start trying to score points and we don't get a deal. Right. So that's why making sure that it's not whatever Mr Brown said was a messy divorce, that we don't allow it to become that.
I'll come to members of the audience in just a moment. Lisa Nandy.
Well, I agree with Ruth, but that is exactly what the government is doing, and I think they've played a
exactly
very dangerous game over the last 24 hours. Well, scoring points, trying to turn this into a zero-sum game. When they were asked to clarify what that line meant in the letter, the Home Secretary said, we are the largest contributor to Europol, so if we left, then we take our information with us. That is quite clearly a government that seems to be threatening that we would remove our cooperation on security matters from the EU if we don't get the free trade agreement that we want. Now, that is, if you think about that for a moment, that is astonishing. That is a Prime Minister who appears to be suggesting that we would side with terrorists and that we would prevent other European countries from getting information that may keep their citizens safe, knowing full well that in return that would prevent us from getting access that would keep our citizens safe as well. The Prime Minister has had 24 hours to clarify that that's not what she meant. She hasn't done it. She ought to do it. And if she didn't mean that, she needs to explain why she included this astonishing phrase in her letter yesterday and chose to make empty threats to the 27 countries that we are currently seeking to reach a trade agreement with.
Lisa,
whichever way you look at this,
it
is an act of serious self-harm to the United Kingdom.
This is absolute nonsense. The only British... It is absolute nonsense. It is the worst type of scaremongering, and the only British politicians that are siding with terrorists, as you put it, are your leader and your shadow chancellor, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, are the only British politicians that side with terrorists in this country.
Incredibly cheap. And not a single member of your party has been out on the airwaves in the last 24 hours denying that the Prime Minister is threatening to withdraw cooperation.
What they have said at every point is that we need to ensure that we get cooperation because we will all be stronger.
Just to clarify,
that is the point.
In what respect are you saying Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell side with terrorists?
Because they wanted the IRA to win.
Oh, I see.
They walked past the people that wore the British Army uniforms and they walked up to the boys with the balaclavas and the bullets and the guns.
I think you should do well to defend your own party at the moment.
The woman in the centre, the back there. Yes.
Given that Theresa May has said this, is it wise to go ahead with the plan for more than doubling the size of the Sellafield site with 3 new nuclear reactors that are now, we're told, to be built by the South Koreans?
OK, and the woman in red there, on the right.
Is not one of the problems that this divorce is going to be based on a 2-year separation? It's going to take at least 2 years negotiation to bring in the Brexit rule.
Yeah, of course it will take 2 years because that's part of the process, part of Article 50. The original question was, is this divorce going to get messy? Well, there are certain people and certain parties within our own House of Commons who want it to be as messy as possible in an attempt to ensure that we actually never leave the European Union, and they really want to keep us in. I think what's happening here at the moment is posturing. It's the phony war. People are setting out the negotiating stalls hardball. But in the end, money always talks. And I think we will come to a good trade deal with the European Union. We have a huge trading deficit with the EU, 17% of EU trade is with the UK, we're its biggest marketplace, and indeed there are 4 to 6 million jobs on the continent which are dependent on our trade. And if we do sign that deal, it will be mutually beneficial, not just for the EU, but for us as well. But the great thing is, after that, we can then go on and sign trade deals all over the globe. We can reconnect with the rest of the world, with India, with China, with the United States. We've got a great future as a result of Brexit, but it has to be the Brexit that people voted for on June the 23rd. And that is and that is a Brexit whereby we get full control of our borders, a real return to our democracy, full control of our waters once again, and as I say, take our seat back on the World Trade Organization and sign trade deals all over the globe.
Gordon Brown, you asked the question. What do you think?
I think sometimes there can be a very big difference between economic theory and practical politics. And we've already just heard, just going around the panel, it's getting a bit messy amongst the panel. Never mind when the actual real players get down to lock horns.
What do you fear when you say messy? What do you mean by messy?
That the United Kingdom could be a much poorer, a much diminished place. In theory, it could work well, but in practice, I fear it might not.
Kate Andrews.
I'm cautiously optimistic, certainly more optimistic than Len, and hopefully to cheer your spirits a bit. I mean, more investment has been coming to the UK since the referendum. 16 billion extra in foreign investment has come here. London was once again named the financial capital and centre of the world just this week. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but you're completely right to highlight that we haven't left yet. It's going to be a 2-year process. Divorces can get very messy when personalities get involved. But if the politicians think of the children, or us, so to speak, I do think that this can be a success. The UK government could do something tomorrow, now that we've triggered Article 50, to make it very clear that they want a good Brexit on good terms. And they should immediately give EU nationals right to remain in this country, regardless of what the EU has to say. Some will argue that this is ceding ground, that she must wait until the European Union agrees to do it for UK citizens. But I have to say, if Theresa May were to do that tomorrow and her government were to do that tomorrow, and the EU were to refuse UK nationals, I think even the likes of Nick Clegg and Tim Farron would change their minds about the referendum result, because that would not be a club that we would want to be a part of.
I'll tell you what else.
Hold on a second. The man in spectacles there, I'll come to him. The man in spectacles, yes, you.
I read today in the papers that Francois Hollande stated that he has his own agenda within his own country that he needs to deal with first, and of course there's a general election next month. I know that Germany has a general election in September, Italy next February. Do you think the changing of guard is going to change like the dynamics of the actual negotiations? Because people are going to say different things. Maybe a new party is going to come in and maybe push the sort of agenda to a different way, really. Okay.
Len?
Yeah, it's a very fluent situation within the political arena right throughout Europe at the moment. But Kate's just said the government could do something tomorrow. I'll tell you what else the government could do tomorrow. They could make it clear that workers' rights are going to be protected.
I'm going to come to that question, so I'm going to actually stop you in your tracks.
OK, fair enough.
All right, because we'll come to it. It's the next question we've got here. But Ruth Davidson, do you just want to comment on this business that the Prime Minister could now, immediately, today, say that EU nationals can stay here?
Well, I think if it were up to me, you know, I would have liked to have seen it done, but I'm not the Prime Minister of the country, and I don't also have responsibility for the hundreds of thousands of Brits that live abroad. And she's got to balance the responsibilities she has for people currently living in Britain, as well as people who are British citizens.
But you would like to have seen her do that?
Like I say, if it were down to me, but then I'm not carrying the responsibility that she has, and I don't have to, in my sense, I don't have to balance the same responsibilities that she does.
But she might find a lot more goodwill overseas if she was prepared to concede in Britain.
All right, let's go to Helen Macman, please.
How much danger will there be to workers' rights from the Great Repeal Bill?
Right, this is, I mean, Len, I will come to you because you've raised it twice already, but Kate Andrews, the danger to workers' rights after the so-called Great Repeal Act, or the Great Repeal Bill, how much danger do you think there'll be? Because the British Parliament will be able to change anything and everything if it chooses.
But also, very importantly, you will be able to vote for new politicians, for new Parliament, if you don't like the changes that they make. I think it is incredibly unlikely that the regulations we're bringing over, especially when it's related to workers' rights, are going to be dramatically rolled back or repealed in the United Kingdom. I think this is a country that very much upholds workers' rights and human rights overall. The idea that simply because it's coming to the United Kingdom, they're going to be thrown out, I just don't fully buy that. I really do think that we need to be implementing sunset clauses into this Great Repeal Bill, which means that bureaucrats can't sit around and take a long time to rights are good for the UK, which ones need to be expanded, and which ones need to be rolled back. If we implement these sunset clauses, it can get bureaucrats to make these decisions sooner rather than later, and then you, the British people, will get to know what deal you're getting and bring in new representation if that's what you want.
Paul Nuttall, Theresa May has talked about if things go badly, we'd have the freedom to set competitive tax and embrace policies that would benefit Britain. Would they include changes to workers' rights? Number of hours people could work, that kind of thing, in 5 years from now?
I don't think they do, actually. But beyond that, I also think that calling it the Great Repeal Bill is technically wrong. It should be called the Great Incorporation Bill, because what we're doing is we're incorporating EU law into British law. We're not really repealing anything, and it's a huge job. Please don't underestimate how big this is. I mean, there's been 52,000 pieces of EU legislation which have affected this country since 1990 alone, but the majority of this, of the work on this will be mainly technical. It's taken out mentions of EU institutions, such as the European Parliament, the European Council, the European Commission, which are incorporated into these pieces of law, which will no longer be relevant once we've left the European Union. But also remember, when it comes to workers' rights, a lot of workers' rights were put in place before we were even members of the European Economic Community, such as clean air, holiday pay, equal pay. They predate being members of the European Union. But what I will say is I encourage the government, please don't mess around with workers' rights during this debate on or this work on the Great Repeal Bill. If you do want to change workers' rights, then take it to Parliament after we've left the European Union. Let's then have a debate, and they can go forward then into the 2020 general election on that platform and see how they get on. But that's a good thing, David, because at least you can have an election on it, because at least it's democratic, unlike the European Commission, which isn't democratic, which meets in secret and at the moment initiates our laws.
I think we've got your point. Len McCluskey. Parliament would decide, he says.
Anyone who believes that this is not going to be used to attack workers' rights is not living in the real world. Leading members of the Conservative Party have already indicated that they're looking forward to reducing it. The frightening thing
I'm sorry, who has said what?
A number of leading members, Liam Fox for one, a number of leading members have said that a lot of workers' rights are nothing more than regulations that restrict business. And the reality is that if we don't make it clear that we're going to defend the rights of British people, Kate says that we're well known for workers' rights. We have the worst protected workforce in the whole of Europe, despite the fact that we are the nation that, having defeated fascism at the end of the Second World War, gave Europe all of the freedoms that they currently have. And yet German workers, Italian workers, French and all the rest of them have got better protections than British workers. And so my challenge to the Prime Minister, and I'm hoping Ruth and others will agree with me, is to put people's minds at rest by making it clear that all workers' rights that are going to be transferred into domestic rights will have the same protections as the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which means that 66% of Parliament would be needed to change those current rights. If she did that tomorrow, that would go a long way to ease people's concerns. My fear is she may not do it.
So you want to see laws passed by Westminster abandoning the normal 50% plus one and going to this 60%, two-thirds for particular laws?
There's a precedent within legislation to do that. But
only for this one.
Here's the point. The Great Appeals Act will give ministers an opportunity, and they've already said they're going to modify some of our laws. Ministers can do that, and courts can do it without any reference to Parliament. That's the fear.
Ruth
and that's what we've got to defend.
I know that... I know that Len's in the middle of an election right now, but let's bring this back down to earth for just a second, shall we? He talks about leading members of the Conservative Party and what they've said. Let's look at the leading member of the Conservative Party, which is the Prime Minister, and exactly what she said. She has said that all of the workers' rights that are currently enshrined under EU law will be coming directly imported wholesale to the United Kingdom. That those rights will be maintained and they will be protected. And she's gone on to say that they can be built upon and extended. So let's not fearmonger. She's been absolutely categorically clear, and let's not try and win votes off the back of this, Len, yeah?
It's not about winning votes, it's about protecting workers. It's about protecting workers. Election or not, I will fight for my members' and workers' rights, whoever it is. She hasn't. She's talked about modifications.
OK, let's clarify. All right, hang on, the two of you. Wait a minute.
What are these not protections about maintained and protected?
What are these modifications?
What are the modifications?
What are these modifications?
You're the one that's making it.
She said.
But you can't give us any examples. You're talking about changing the way we make laws. You're talking about...
No, because
you're on a stump speech here, Len. Stop it.
The Prime Minister initially said she was going to lift employment law out of Europe and put it into domestic legislation. Music to my ears. She then said, we'll lift those laws, put them into domestic legislation with some modifications.
Can I read this out?
Now, that's a euphemism.
Can I read this out absolutely clear?
Len, you've had your turn.
Right. As we translate the body of European law into our domestic regulations, we will ensure that workers' rights are fully protected and maintained. Stop scaremongering.
It's not scaremongering here. It's not scaremongering.
All right, now, Len, you've had your say on that. You, ma'am. And then I'll bring you in. Yes.
Len says that our workers' rights aren't the best in the world. However, everybody from all over the world wants to come and work in the UK, so they must be good.
OK. Lisa.
Well, Ruth just read a quote out to us, so I'll read one back to her. We are clear about what we want from Europe. We say yes to the single market. That was the manifesto that your Prime Minister and you stood on in the last election. That is the manifesto that the Prime Minister is busy ripping up without having been elected herself as she goes about these negotiations about Brexit. So don't tell us that we can rely on the word of this Prime Minister, because on a whole host of issues, from the single market to raising national insurance contributions, she has already, in the very short time she's been in office, gone back on her word. And I think there is another reason that nobody on this panel has raised yet why we should be seriously concerned about the profoundly undemocratic nature of the Great Repeal Bill. Because yes, it is true that the Prime Minister is planning to take 40 years of laws that we've negotiated with our European Union counterparts and transcribe them into this bill. But she is also giving herself, as part of this process, huge sweeping powers to make retrospective changes to that legislation with virtually no scrutiny. The upshot of this is that when she and her Tory ministers go off to negotiate trade deals with people like China and the United States, all it will take is for those governments to say to her, scrap those rights and we will give you your trade deal, and she will have given herself the power to do it. Now, I say this, she has got a mandate to leave the EU, and it is right now that we respect that and that we move on and work out how to get the best deal for Britain. But this unelected Prime Minister has absolutely no mandate to drive down our living standards, our jobs and our terms and conditions at the whim of foreign governments.
Ruth, do you want to just answer that and then I'll come to you? You want to answer him?
Sorry. Sorry, I thought you were pointing to the crowd. No, what I'm saying is the Prime Minister has laid out what it is that she wants to achieve. She has said that she's going to, in the first instance, make sure that we take all of the European law that does exist and create it into UK law so there's no holes in our legal framework.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking of the single market. Lisa said she was on record as saying...
It's in the manifesto.
In the manifesto, we'd stay in the single market. It's been abandoned without any...
They gave her her mandate to govern.
17.5 million people across this country voted to leave the European Union. OK? Now, in large part, not everybody, but in large part, much of that was based on changes to immigration. The other 27 nations have said that to stay part of the single market, the 4 freedoms, which includes free movement of people, are indivisible. That means you can't have both. So what the Prime Minister has said she will do is that she will seek to have a full free trade agreement with the European Union so that we're still able to export and to trade with the other member states.
The woman there in the front.
Why should we believe the words she says?
The woman there in the front.
I'm concerned that it's said in the papers today that they're going to push 1,000 pieces, or up to 1,000 pieces of legislation through without scrutiny. I'm concerned that Conservatives will have sole authority to push those pieces of legislation
That's exactly
through.
what we're
Paul Nuttall,
Yeah.
are you in favour of this repatriation of all this legislation without scrutiny? If she's right?
Well, obviously, without democratic scrutiny, it causes concern. However, David Davis has made it perfectly clear that those pieces of legislation, there'll just be technical changes in terms of taking European Union terms out. So, for example, European Parliament, European Council and whatnot. Now,
how do you know they'll just be technical? How do you know they won't slip in some other things?
Well, because I'm going on the word of David Davis on this. But the point Lisa made before about the Conservatives breaking a manifesto pledge in 2015 of keeping us in the single market, I just don't buy it, because the world is a very different place now. People voted to leave the European Union. They knew that they were voting to leave the single market. David Cameron said voting to leave the EU means leaving the single market. Osborne said the same. Michael Gove said the same. Boris Johnson said the same.
Total rewriting of history.
No, it's not. It's not. And even in the leaflet that the government sent to every single household at the cost of £9 million to the taxpayer, it said quite clearly, leaving the European Union means leaving the single market, and we're leaving that organisation.
They didn't vote to be... They might have voted...
Kate.
Look, these Henry VIII laws, which is essentially what they're being called, where the government's going to bring over legislation but change it slightly because we might not have an institution by the same name, are being a bit misconstrued, I think, by Lisa and Len. But what is certainly true is that this government is not being held to account by anybody right now because there is no functioning opposition. Unless you want to abandon every piece of EU legislation and start from scratch, which would be incredibly dangerous to these workers' rights that we've discussed today, you have to bring them over and change them. But the big point here is that you now will have the ability, if you don't like the way they're being changed, or if you think the government is taking too many liberties, you get to vote on it. You get to vote on it and you get to change it. And that is the big takeaway.
The
general election.
Well, hang on a second. The point was no functioning opposition. Len McCluskey, do you have a functioning opposition? I see you've given Jeremy Corbyn 15 months to change his ways or come through in the polls?
No, I didn't give Jeremy 15 months at all. I think I said that undoubtedly, because Jeremy Corbyn is the only political leader I've ever met, including, I'm afraid, people on this platform who don't have an ego. And I've indicated that Jeremy himself would be somebody who would want to look at the situation in, say, 15 months' time. But I want to make this quick point.
Hang on, before you leave that, why do you want to wait 15 months?
Because Jeremy Corbyn has been elected. Jeremy Corbyn has been elected by a landslide victory on 2 occasions now. My union, my executive, supported them the first time. Our policy conference with over 1,000 delegates overwhelmingly supported them a second time. Why? Because what his views and policies coincide with what Unite wants. He's anti-austerity, so are my members. He's in favour of a proper industrial strategy, so are my members.
What's with this 15 months business?
He wants to save the National Health Service, so do my members.
What happens 15 months
from now? The reality
now?
is, I'll tell you what, he has been unmercifully attacked day in, day out by the right-wing media since he was elected. But I want to remind everyone, your audience and viewers at home, first of all, problems in the Labour Party didn't start with Jeremy Corbyn being elected. They started 20 years ago when we started to lose the support of ordinary working people. And I would make this point. Before the disastrous coup that happened last summer, the opinion polls, Labour were neck and neck. One thing is clear. The British electorate will not vote for a party that is divided. And so the message within the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party and the rest of the party is that we have to unite.
All right.
Unite behind policies.
All right, fine. I think you've made the point. I'm sorry to stop you.
See if a very decent, honest man can break through this horrible, horrible media barrier to put those points to it.
Well, This horrible media barrier, as you put it, also included Lisa Nandy leaving the shadow cabinet and supporting somebody else for the leadership. So what do you say to him?
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that I don't agree with Len about this. We've had the leadership contest. We've had 2 leadership contests over the last few years. We were on different sides in that debate, and I certainly don't agree with him that we were doing well in the opinion polls before I left the shadow cabinet. I think there is a responsibility on all of us to do better, to be really honest with you, not just about being an opposition to the government, but providing a clear alternative. But what I would also say to you is this, that there is quite a narrative developing in British politics at the moment, which I think is quite lazy and I think is quite dangerous, that there is no real opposition to this government at the moment. And I have to say this to you, that is not what I see when I go down to Parliament on a weekly basis, because in the last few weeks, I've seen Labour MPs working with MPs from all of the different political parties, dragging the government against their will into Parliament to hold them to account on issues, on everything from
SNP
Brexit to the National Health Service. We've worked with SNP MPs, we've worked with Liberal MPs, we've worked with backbench Tory MPs, a small handful of whom occasionally find a conscience, and we've worked with much bigger groups of people outside, including Len's Trade Union, and that is how we win.
So, Ruth, you face a formidable opposition in the House of Commons. Well, you don't, because you're in Scotland,
in Holyrood, yeah.
Holyrood.
Well, I'm really interested in Len, who's still a great believer in Jeremy Corbyn, talking about opinion polls. Because today, Jeremy Corbyn's been in office about 18 months. 18 months into Ed Miliband's leadership, the Labour Party was polling 44% and it was 10% ahead of the Tories, and it went on to lose the next election. Today, the Labour Party is polling at 26% and it is 18 points behind the Tory party. So that's the size of the drop-off that there has been in Labour. Now, you might think, as a Tory, that I would love this. It's because of lack of leadership. You might think that I might love this, but actually I don't, because, yes, I am a Tory, but I am also a Democrat. And I think that the Labour Party is not only having a disservice to itself by keeping Jeremy Corbyn in place, but it's a disservice to our country and our democracy, because our democracy relies upon the idea that should a government fall, there is a government in waiting ready to go. It relies upon that tension between government and opposition to make sure that we walk a line. And every week I hear a new coming person in the Labour Party that's going to be the next leader, whether it's Rebecca Long-Berry or whether it's Clive Lewis or whether it's Lisa Nandy. And Lisa, for God's sake, love, do something about it and get in there. And if it's not going to be you, back someone else, because this country needs a new Labour Party leader. Because it is pathetic.
That is the sort of ringing endorsement that I need, like, to be honest.
I spoiled it for you.
David, all right, now I want to hear from some more people here. The woman in the second row from the back.
I have the greatest sympathies for Lisa, and I think that you're not in a government that you want to be a part of right now. But to Len's comments about Jeremy Corbyn not having an ego, essentially the Labour Party has turned into a cult of personality, and it's an absolute disgrace. And it's all very well standing by policies such as wanting to support our NHS, but if you're never going to get elected, it's completely pointless. And I'm a paid-up Labour Party member, and it's an absolute disgrace to see the state of Labour at the moment.
OK. And you, sir, there. The man in blue, yes, you, sir.
The Labour Party is a total disgrace. It's not doing the job it's been paid for, nor is Jeremy Corbyn. Len says it'll take 15 months to sort him out. Does he mean it'll take 15 months to have a Brexit of Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party?
Right. And the woman there in the second row from the back. Yes.
Is it time that David Miliband came back?
Is that what you'd like to see?
Not personally, no, but...
Why do you suggest it, then? Are you to destroy Labour or to help them?
I think they're doing a good enough job of destroying themselves at the moment.
Let's stick with domestic politics for a moment. I've got another question coming up. Before we just go to it, question time is going to be in Gillingham next week. We were going to be in Maidstone, so if you were thinking of coming to Maidstone, think again and go over the motorway and come to Gillingham. And that's next week. Then there's a pause for Easter. Then we'll be in Oxford on the 27th of April. There are the details on the screen, and I will give them at the end. But it's just, if you're in Gillingham or in the Gillingham area, you want to come, this is your chance. Right, let's have a question from Hanny Cox, please.
With no MPs and Brexit achieved, is UKIP finished?
Right, your turn, Paul, to take the rap. He lost Douglas Carswell, so he's got no MPs. He's leader of a party that has no MPs in the House of Commons, even though he's an MP.
I don't have to repeat it. At least my own parliamentary party is united. Look. UKIP doesn't need an MP to be influential, OK? I mean, let's not forget, back in January 2013, UKIP forced the then British Prime Minister David Cameron into giving the referendum he never wanted to give. You know, he only gave that referendum because UKIP was chomping at the heels of the Conservative Party, going up in the polls, doing well in local elections, and we forced that issue without having UKIP backsides in the House of Commons. And we will continue to influence politics. We will continue to be the guard dogs of Brexit in an attempt to ensure that we get the Brexit that people voted for on June the 23rd. Equally, we believe we have great opportunities going forward, moving into Labour working class areas. We were speaking before about Jeremy Corbyn and his Labour Party, who we feel don't represent working people anymore. There is a huge bank of patriotic working people who feel no affinity with a guy who says nice things about the IRA, or a shadow Home Secretary that thinks anyone who voted Brexit is a racist. You know, we've got great opportunities. We're at 12% in the opinion polls. Membership continues to rise.
10%.
No, 12% yesterday.
10% this week. 1 point behind the Liberal Democrats. Whose poll was that?
I think it was YouGov.
YouGov was 10%.
Oh, well, it was a different one then. Polls, who believed it? But seriously, you know, we've got a fantastic opportunity. We've got big elections coming up in May, and I really do believe that you haven't seen the end of UKIP. I've read UKIP's obituary so many times. We always come back, and we always come back stronger.
OK, Mr Cox, what's your view?
Well, yeah, I think they are finished. I mean, Paul Nuttall, you said yesterday, I agree with everything Theresa May said. So what is the point of UKIP? Now she's doing the heartbreak.
They said that today, actually. No, don't go on.
I've got to come back on this because this is really important. Because,
oh, is it?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do agree with everything Theresa May said. However, the one thing we know about Theresa May is that she's always very good at talking the talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, she always fails. Look at her record as Home Secretary.
Fine, OK. Ruth Davidson, thank you.
Do you know what? I hope it's the end of UKIP. I really do. And I think I'm listening to Paul here talking about we're the guard dogs of Brexit and we come back stronger. You just lost your only MP. You lost a by-election in what you said was the Brexit capital of Britain. You know, it's just time to put it to bed.
Well,
you know?
You've got honeymoon at the moment. It's probably the longest honeymoon that in the history of politics, actually. But that honeymoon isn't going to last, and politics will come back on.
But I'm not waking up next to you in the morning, Paul, I'll tell you that.
But as soon as she begins to backslide on Brexit, and I believe she will begin to barter things away.
All right, Kate Andrews, I'll come to you then.
What is the ideological backbone of UKIP? When I think about even a very divided Labour Party, I can make some pretty good guesses to what they're going to agree upon. Redistribution to some extent. For the Tories, it's very similar. You know, low taxes, business freedoms to some extent. With UKIP, post-Brexit, it's really hard to know what that is, unless they're going to become the anti-immigration party. But that platform alone is not going to do very well in the UK. And it's ridiculous to think that UKIP is the party of workers' rights. The UKIP and the SNP are struggling from the same problem. They get so caught up in these grand speeches about independence, they forget about policies to actually govern on a day-to-day basis.
All right.
So fundamentally, I don't see them sticking around.
All right.
Well, UKIP seems to keep getting into trouble in a lot of different ways. I mean, yesterday, Neil Hamilton said it's the worst assembly that poor children should commit suicide. Poor children should commit suicide if they suffered as a result of Brexit.
OK. And the man up there in the cap. You, sir.
Paul, yes. You've lost your only MP. You lost Stoke. You've even lost your cloth cap. There's no future in it for you.
McCluskey. Yeah, I agree with the young man at the back. I think UKIP is finished. UKIP is a pressure group. And the only two things that you can think of is they wanted out of Europe. Well, we're out of Europe now. And the second thing is foreigners are to blame for everything. And they'll soon be exposed the shallowness of that. The idea, and Kate's right, the idea that UKIP represent the working class people of this nation is an absolute joke. It's unions who represent workers. It's UKIP who use workers. And I'm going to put a challenge to you, Paul.
Go on.
Because I wouldn't like the audience or viewers at home to believe that Paul Nuttall represents my great city of Liverpool, a city that has, for decades and decades, welcomed people from all over the world. So instead of being a carpetbagger in Stoke or Leigh or anywhere else, I challenge you to stand in Liverpool at the next election. And I tell you what, not only will you not win, you will lose your deposits.
Well, hang on. I've got to answer that. Come on. No. You know,
it's what's called a rhetorical challenge.
No, well, you know, I've stood in Liverpool time and time. I've stood in Bootle time and time again in elections, Len. You know, I live in Liverpool. I don't know whether you do.
And they've always rejected you.
But well, you know, Liverpool is a safe Labour city. There is no denying that. But UKIP has got a great future going forward. You know, we're the only party that stand up for veterans, wants to cut foreign aid, and control on borders.
Can we be clear? Nobody is the party of working people right now. I mean, it's certainly not Labour. They talk about the cost of living, but all the policies that they want to bring in would probably up your cost of living. The Tories are bringing...
Scrapping 0 hours... £10 minimum wage.
So you want to get rid of jobs and look at the number of people...
Getting rid of jobs through 0 hours. Of course, coming from a right-wing think tank like yours, that's exactly what...
Look at the number of people signing up to unions between the ages of 16 to up to 35. It's negligible. It's tiny. Only 17%, 25 to 34, 5%. 16 to 25.
That's because...
All right, let's move on. Lisa Nandy has not yet had a word to say about UKIP, and you might have.
I haven't got a good word to say about you. I mean, I think there is a real problem for UKIP because they were a party that was very clearly held together by this real anger and opposition to the European Union. I've sat on platforms with Paul and many of his colleagues over the years, and I've heard every single question that they've been asked. How would you protect Sure Start? How would you rebuild the NHS? Them answer with, we'd leave the European Union. And then they have very little else to say. And that's exactly what we've seen over the last few months. We've seen that not only do they have very little to say about protecting our public services, they have very little to say, actually, about how we build a Britain post-Brexit. And that is an absolute disgrace, Paul.
Are they finished, in your view?
If we drive this country's economy off a cliff and crash out of the EU in 2 years' time with no deal, this is working people's jobs, it's their lives, it's their families and their public services. And you have been one of the leading voices driving us into this position. You at least have a responsibility to have something to say to help put it right.
All right, we're going on. Sorry, we're going on. Michael Johnson, please.
Yes, Sergeant Blackman, Marine A, is about to be released. Does the country really understand the nasty, harsh reality of modern war?
Are you in favour of his being released?
Absolutely. I think he was stitched up, and I think it's justice being done right now.
Ruth Davidson.
Honestly, I don't believe that if you haven't been in conflict, you can ever truly understand the nature of conflict. And I think that we are so far now from the society that was of my sort of parents' generation and older, where there was a number of people who had been in conflict and who understood it and were able to have those conversations, that golden thread of ex-service personnel that we often seek to misunderstand. I can't comment knowledgeably on that case. I don't think anyone that wasn't in the courtroom can comment knowledgeably on it, or anybody that wasn't in his platoon and saw what happened can comment knowledgeably on it. But what I can say is that particularly when we look at some of the stuff that's happened in Northern Ireland and other cases with Iraq and others, we need to, if we're asking our young men and women to do desperate things in, unbelievable circumstances and make life and death decisions that, yes, they're trained for, but still weigh heavily on them, they need to know that they have protections when they come home and they won't be chased 10, 20 years after the fact.
No, that's away from Marine A and whether that was a stitch-up. Len McCluskey.
Well, the Geneva Convention is extremely important. It's there to make certain that during conflict and war, any criminal behaviour will be dealt with. But here's the truth. I don't think anybody is going to be unhappy about Marine A, and I think his wife, who has exposed the trauma, and it must be unimaginable, the type of trauma that our soldiers, our armed forces are exposed to, and what they see And I think this raises a very serious issue about mental health. I think, Ruth, you've done some work on this yourself, and I'm hoping that this will lead to the government looking at the whole question of mental health, which is becoming more and more an issue. I want to make this point as well. Most wars are wrong, but it's the politicians who are to blame for wars, not our armed forces. And the reality here is that we should make certain that many of the cases we hear about of ex-soldiers living on the streets now, unable to cope because of mental stress, is something we need to start to take seriously. In my own union, we've currently embarked upon a number of projects. In the road haulage, for example, I met with 20 companies and our shop stewards in road haulage because of mental health stress that is developing. So out of this, I hope, will come some good. And I hope politicians won't be so quick to jump to war and send our young men and women into conflicts that, as you rightly say, are now unimaginable, the traumas that they have to go through.
All right. Just a reminder, in case anyone had forgotten, that Alexander Blackman had a murder conviction reduced to a verdict of manslaughter. You, sir?
Sergeant Blackman was actually used as a political pawn. If the circumstances had been different, he actually saved those 24 people who would have been called out to rescue the Taliban fighter. Now, I actually think that was probably a mercy killing. It was a mercy killing by shooting that man on the ground there, because he would have died anyway. But the problem is, what would have happened if the 24 who came out had been killed?
The 24 being the
quick reactionary force and the medivacs and everything that would have been called out to him. We would have been hailing him as a hero as opposed to being a prisoner.
OK, and you, ma'am?
I know that we've seen the the footage of him shooting the person on the ground, and I feel that that person should have been taken a prisoner, not killed in cold blood.
Kate Andrews.
I don't believe in trial by media. I agree with Ruth that none of us were a part of the jury, none of us were the judge. And so if this new evidence came forward that Marine was very sick and they've decided to downgrade his sentence to manslaughter, then that is that we have to, believe that is the right thing to do. We have to support the justice system in that way. To this larger question about whether or not we should reduce our expectations for soldiers or keep them incredibly high, I mean, obviously it's the latter. What happened in Westminster last week was such a testament to the British people that medics were taking care of the attacker and the terrorist next to his victims because of the standards of this country. We don't leave people behind. So in the case of Marine, it is the biggest disappointment that we let him down in his sickness and we weren't there for him. But to the wider point of lowering our standards, never. That's not what Britain's about.
But I believe that if he was in that environment and under the stresses and the illness that he had, I think once of being shot at, he was quite within his right to shoot back. Maybe not how he did it, but of course, shoot back.
All right, and the man behind you?
I mean, it comes down to the events in Westminster last week. Does the media not have a bigger responsibility? We're exposing people's lives and national security is at risk based on some of the coverage that I thought was discussed in the coverage last week. How much we need to know about how Theresa May was sort of led out of Parliament. Do we really need to know that? And we made this guy a martyr last week.
And a woman up there with her hand in the air, yes. You, or is it a man with his hand in the air? I can't quite... There's a hand in the air, anyway. Yes, you, sir.
Surely the government should be looking after our soldiers. They're going to war for us. We've had people in Northern Ireland who are currently under investigation. It's terrible.
And the Geneva Convention...
Yeah, we should apply to it, but Blackman should have been looked after.
Listen, Nandy.
Just on one of the latest points there, that gentleman over there, I think one of the things that I found most troubling about the aftermath of those Westminster attacks was the images that were circulated, not just on social media, but amongst the mainstream media as well, about which clearly identified victims. If you'd known some of those people, you would have been able to recognise their clothing. And the idea that we would do that to families is just horrendous. On the question about Marine, I think this case raises really quite troubling questions about how we treat our armed forces, because the picture that emerged from the court case, and I agree with Kate and Ruth that we can't know the full details without having been privy to that information, but the picture that emerged was of a man who had a recognisable, diagnosable, treatable mental health condition, who'd been left on the front line in a situation of serious and extreme stress, with what appears to be very little oversight or support either. And if that is true, then that is an absolute disgrace. Not just for that man and his family, but also for all of those members of the armed forces who, as Len rightly says, rely on the Geneva Convention for their protection, to protect them from retaliation attacks, to protect them when they're held prisoner, and to uphold the good name of our armed forces. And of course, it's right that the court case and the process around the court case couldn't do anything to address that, but our government can. And I think now that this case is over, we have to make sure that something positive comes out of what has been a terrible, terrible case for everybody concerned, and that we support our troops better and uphold the reputation of our armed forces.
Paul, can you be brief? Because I want to get one more question in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything which has been said around this table. I think there was a clear lack of leadership out in Afghanistan. I feel very sorry for Marine A. He obviously had psychological issues as a result of what he's seen, but it does paint the bigger picture, which is we don't look after our boys when they come, and girls when they return home. 7,000 veterans slept rough last night. It's a disgrace. It needs to be sorted, and I call on the government to do something about it.
No, I'm going something. OK. We've got time to fit this question in from Christine Kay, please, before we end. Christine.
Is the recent Health England decision to charge for gluten-free foods and other products the beginning of pay-as-you-go NHS?
That's right. That's the head of Simon Stevens said GPs will no longer prescribe certain medicines that you can get cheaply in supermarkets. Is this the beginning of pay-as-you-go NHS? We have 5 minutes to talk about this. We talk about the NHS quite a lot, but let's go around the table first. You start, Lisa.
So I think that the review has identified a real problem, which is that it appears that we are spending more on prescribing drugs than we would spend if we just simply got people to buy them over the counter. But identifying the problem doesn't mean that we then leap to the right solution. And it seems to me that there is a real problem with the solution in this case, which is that we are then asking people essentially to pay for prescriptions, for drugs, many of whom would have been entitled to them for free as prescriptions. And some of these things, they sound very frivolous, but, you know, medical hand creams, for example, if you've got a skin condition, can be incredibly important. And I am worried that this represents the thin end of the wedge. The truth behind this is that we're not funding our National Health Service properly, whatever the government says, and we mustn't introduce rationing by the back door.
Kate Andrews.
I don't think that sunscreen and fish oils are legitimate prescriptions on the NHS when people are being denied cancer treatments because they're too expensive. There is a very serious problem here in Britain with the National Health Service. It is crumbling around us all. And stories like this, and the head of the NHS, Stevens, coming out and saying that crackdowns on Band-Aids and indigestion tablets is going to save the NHS, is borderline satire. The UK is not unique in its universal delivery of healthcare, free at the point of access. You do not pay if you cannot afford it. It's not unique in that sense at all. It is unique in the sense that nobody outside of the UK, anywhere else in the world, has adopted it. The UK needs not to look to America, but to look to France and Europe and Belgium and Switzerland and Germany, where cancer patients are significantly more likely to survive, where your likeliness to be able to see a doctor in a good amount of time is through the roof. It is time for a real conversation about reform. If that includes spending more money, fine, but not on a system that's broken. And I speak to the politicians on the stage tonight that this conversation is not had enough, and I do believe that it's finally time, because the system is crumbling around us and something needs to change.
All right, you think that?
I think the erosion of the NHS in the UK, and particularly in the north of England, has already long ago begun. I mean, for instance, in Whitehaven, which is 40 miles from here, anyone in an emergency situation or a mother in a desperate situation having a baby in an ambulance faces a 40-mile journey of an hour to Carlisle to have that baby in a consultant-led maternity department. Now, that is not care-free at the point of need for people in Cumbria. We need to protect our NHS, and I'm sorry, but that's not going to come from privatisation. It's going to come from investment.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a worry that it is the beginning of pay-as-you-go for the NHS. And, you know, if you talk about like, gluten-free foods, I mean, gluten-free foods are quite expensive, although I do tend to agree that you shouldn't be getting sunscreen on the NHS or cod liver oil or anything like that. The problem that we've got with the NHS in this country is it needs added investment. And another part of the problem that we've got is that Labour decided to sign us up to these crazy PFI deals. So for every £1 out of every 10 that goes into the NHS is going to pay off the debt that you guys
oppose its very existence. I'm not going to take lectures on the NHS from somebody who's spent their entire career trying to privatise it.
No, I want to see more money into the NHS. I want to see £3 billion.
Oh, is that the last we need to see?
And the way to get...
Hold on, no, wait a second. Ruth Davidson, I'll come to you.
Well, I think I take the point up there when the woman was talking about a 40-mile round trip. Actually, in Scotland, with the downgrading of the Caithness General Hospital, actually, it's over a 100-mile round trip now for someone to get to Raigmore.
Let's talk about the issue Christine raised.
Well, the issue, I think, actually, is to take quite a lot of these decisions out of the hands of politicians so you don't have hysterical he said, she said, which this is beginning to turn into, onto this bloody panel. That's why you have ideas like people like NICE, the Centre for Clinical Excellence, that makes decisions about what is the best course of treatment for people to be made available free at the point of delivery. And that's why, actually, I'm not a clinician. These sort of decisions should be taken out of the hands of elected politicians and put in the hands of people that have got the qualifications in order to make them to keep our NHS at the best possible
standard. Is it the
standard.
beginning of pay-as-you-go?
Well, at the moment, you're already paying for prescriptions in England and Wales at a level that is different to... Well, it's different systems across the country. So if, for example, you are prescribed something that costs less than the price of a prescription, you still pay the prescription cost for it because somebody else is getting a medicine that costs more than the price of prescription. So at the moment, there's already people that are, you know, it's not the cost of the medicine, it's the cost of the prescription price.
The young woman at the back is 100% correct. Privatisation is well down the road in our National Health Service, and what we should be campaigning for is the renationalisation of our public services, our NHS, with more money. And I'll tell you where the money should come from. The money should come from tax avoidance and tax evasion, the super rich and the corporate elite who rob from the Treasury £40 billion a year. Let that, if the government could only spend half its energy on that instead of attacking ordinary working people, 1% pay rise for our NHS people, the very heroes that raced out of St Thomas's Hospital last week onto the bridge, disregarding their own safety to help people, told this week that they've got to cut their standard of living. Attack the rich, make them pay their taxes and invest in our National Health Service and renationalise it.
And Ruth, just before we end, quick answer. Is there £40 billion a year to come from the rich who aren't paying their taxes?
Independent fiscal bodies.
I'm asking Ruth.
We're cracking down.
Is there £40 billion to be got out?
Well, I think that there's a lot more to be done, and it should be done, and a lot more is being done. I cannot tell you the figure right now.
All right, we have to end there. I'm sorry, because our time's up. That answer hangs in the...
Hangs in the balance.
Oh, hangs in the wind.
Independent fiscal bodies tell us that.
OK, independent fiscal bodies. We're not allowed to trust independent fiscal bodies, are we? Because they're experts.
Not anymore.
We're not allowed to. Well,
Not anymore.
We couldn't trust the experts. We have to stop. Our time's up, I'm sorry. We're in Gillingham next week, next Thursday. Not Maidstone, but Gillingham. We have the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron, on the panel, among others. After that, the next programme is in Oxford on April the 27th. So I hope you can come either to Gillingham next week or 3 weeks later to Oxford. Go to the website, which is address is there, or call 033123 9988. Radio 5 Live listeners, as you know, the debate goes on until 1 o'clock in the morning with question time, extra time. But my thanks to all of you on this panel, to all of you who came to Carlisle, still here in England, and until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.